All right, thank you, everybody. Like she said, my name is Mujan, and I am the last talk, so I do hope we end on a good note here. So I'm going to talk about how crystals keep hearts pumping. Okay, so when you think of a crystal, okay, you probably think of something like an amethyst, maybe a blue diamond that's thrown off the end of a boat at the end of Titanic, a snowflake that you're catching on your tongue or making a snowman with. What people generally don't think of as a crystal is steel or any type of metal, something like that that you might see at a construction site or a hardware store or something. But these metals are crystals. So what we have here is, atoms making up a solid, right? So we've got the atom at the very low level, and then this kind of steel bar that we'd all be more familiar with. But in the middle, what's really important is how those atoms are arranged. And what's really cool is that using high-resolution microscopy, you can actually see those atoms, okay? And you can see that they are in this periodic type of arrangement. And that's what a material scientist or a metallurgist is going to call a crystal. Anytime you have atoms in these repeating patterns. So what's really cool is that in a much bigger sample like a steel bar, what we actually are really interested in is not only how these atoms are arranged, but also the fact that there are kind of clusters of regions where all atoms are oriented the same way, and this is called a grain. Okay, so here we've got grain, and then we're interested in this pattern of atoms over here. So that's kind of the length scale that we're going to focus on, is kind of in the middle, but I just want to put it in the broader context of we're familiar with atoms, we're familiar with steel bars. This is what's going on kind of in the middle. Now, the arrangement of atoms in a material is responsible for just about every property that you can think of, right? So the way that it conducts heat, how strong it is, but it's also really, it's also responsible for much more dramatic or exciting properties. So what I'm showing here is another one of these beautiful high-resolution micrographs of a material called nickel titanium, or nitinol. And the really cool thing about nitinol is that it has a particular property called shape memory. So this is me pulling apart a nitinol wire. And then what I'm going to do is apply some heat to it using just a everyday blow dryer. And what we're seeing is that wire remembering its shape and coming back to that original state that it was in. Okay, and I actually do have this wire with me and my blow dryer if anybody wants to play with it afterwards. But I figured the video is going to be a little bit better in this context. So we do get these really cool properties that come out of the arrangement of atoms. But nothing in nature is perfect, so we end up with something called dislocations. Okay, now dislocations are essentially breaks in that pattern, or I'd like to think of it as misalignments of those patterns. So what you can see here is this half plane of atoms that is just kind of in there and screwing up the rest of the crystal. Okay, so if you looked at it as we're doing so through the page or through the screen, what you end up with is a line. Okay, now in a real material, you're going to get thousands and thousands of those lines. Okay, it ends up actually looking like this, like spaghetti. Okay, so the more that you bend, pull, whatever, you're introducing dislocations, and that's actually what it's going to look like under a microscope. So what I do is look at how those dislocations move. Okay, so I have here on the right, it's going to be a video, and what I want you to take away from this is that the dislocation is moving on a certain plane. Okay, so what you're looking at here, the box itself, is basically a chunk of crystal. Okay, so 40 by 40 by 40 microns. So I'm interested in looking at how that dislocation moves on certain planes, and then how fast it's moving and how it expands. Now, if we get a little bit more complicated, okay, now we need to think about, well, how are dislocations exiting a surface? Okay, how are they going to interact when dislocations moving on different planes are interacting? So the different colors that you're seeing are dislocations moving on different planes. I think it's simple to see, right? You've got the purple clearly moving on this plane, green on this one. Okay, so that's all happening in a real material. Now we add one more bit of complexity and we look at the boundaries between those grains. So if you remember earlier, I showed that beautiful micrograph where you could actually see the arrangement of atoms, but on a bigger scale, see the grains themselves. Now, the boundaries between grains are where a lot of amazing science happens, but a lot of very complicated stuff happens as well. So what I look at is the buildup of dislocations on those boundaries. So this is an example, right? So we're starting off with dislocations on two sides of a crystal and then kind of meeting in the middle. And you can see on the boundary here, they start to pile up. Okay, so now let's see that on a much bigger scale, a more complicated scale. Okay, so what happens if we change the crystal sizes themselves? Okay, so the grain size in a material is incredibly important. Okay, so for a kind of rule of thumb, the smaller the grains in a material are, the stronger it is, but the harder it is to bend before fracture. Okay, the bigger a grain is, okay, there's more time for dislocations to build up in it. Okay, so it's much easier to bend, but it's less strong. So the idea that we have to look at not just the dislocation motions themselves, but how they interact in a particular size scale is incredibly important. So just an example, if we move left to right, we're increasing the crystal size. You can see on the far left, okay, much different behavior than on the far right. In the far left, we see dislocations don't even really have time to grow before they exit. So the mechanical properties that you're going to see in a material that's grains of this size is going to be much different than over here. Now I'm going to show you the same exact plot that was on this previous page. Okay, but I just want to show you a little bit better, okay, what exactly is happening at that boundary. What you're seeing in the scale bar here, yellow to blue, don't think about it too much. It just means that one of them means that it's being pushed on the boundary from one side, and the other means that it's going to the boundary from the other side. Okay, so all I want to show you is that you see these really interesting intersects at the boundary, okay, and we see a really high total stress at the boundary as well. Okay, so I don't want anyone to take away any numbers from this, but just to say that the buildup of stress at boundaries is going to depend really heavily on that grain size, and from that, what we see at mechanical properties on a much larger scale. Okay, so I promised that we were going to talk about hearts. I'll admit I don't know that much about biology. I am not a heart surgeon or anything like that, but I want to think back to our shape memory demo earlier on in the video, and now I want to ask more of a heart-related question. So does anybody know how babies breathe before they're born? Anyone? It's not a trick question, okay? Babies don't breathe before they're born, okay? They're in their mother. Their mother is breathing for them. And while a baby's inside the mother, okay, there's actually a hole in its heart, and the mother is responsible for delivering oxygenated blood to the baby, and the baby is not doing that by themselves. But in a very small fraction of babies, they are born with that hole still in their heart. Okay, so there is no separation of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, and unfortunately that is not compatible with life. You need oxygenated blood to survive. But what happened decades ago is a scientist took that nitinol that we looked at earlier, made it into a shape that resembles an umbrella. So think of those like the ribs, right, when you see an umbrella, and packed it all together and actually inserted into a vein in the baby's leg and took that piece of metal, that ribbed umbrella shape, all the way up to the baby's heart, up into the hole in that baby's heart, and the body temperature of that baby actually caused it to expand. And then we get scar tissue that forms over those ribs and the baby is fine. Okay, so how do crystals keep hearts flowing? So we want to get back a little bit to dislocations, and now I'm going to show you the same exact video, but I like showing it a different way. Now I'm going to pour boiling water on it. This was a very exciting day when the mail came. My friends got a lot of videos, and I'm still going to show them off to a lot of people. But I just want to talk a little bit more about how dislocations kind of come into this shape memory thing that is so important for so many medical uses. What is actually going on here, okay, is this kind of cycle. Now, I understand that this plot has introduced some words that I haven't used before. Okay, I don't want us to get too caught up in the actual terms, austenite and martensite, but I do want us to focus on this cycle. Okay, so essentially what's happening is if you take a piece of wire that I have in my bag, okay, it's going to be in this state. Okay, and then I'm going to tell you, go ahead and bend it, pull it, do whatever you want. Now we're in this state. Then I'm going to take the hair dryer and set it to the end of it. You're going to see it roll back up, and it's going to be in this state. Okay, so that's exactly what's happening in shape memory is you're going from state to state. And I just want to point out that the reason that you can cool that shape and have it retain the same structure is actually because if you look at the boundary of the atoms, okay, from here to here, it's actually staying the same, right? It's just the bonds themselves that are changing. Okay, so this is what is actually going on with that shape memory material. And then I'll just say one more final thing. but I'm also excited about another property that's very close to shape memory called superelasticity. And essentially, superelasticity takes out this component, and you just end up going from, oh, I apologize, takes out this component and just goes from this one to this one to this one to this one, where applying loads and then removing that load changes the structure and gets you back to that original. So with that, I really hope that we ended on a good note, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that you might have.